Okay, welcome back, everyone. I think it's just gone 1:30 there now. Welcome to the second half of the day. We call this Igniting the Irish Ecosystem. And we really want to use the second half of the day to gain a bit of momentum into the next steps and what we can do as a country. The first keynote speaker we're going to do slightly differently to the ones before. We're going to do it more as a fireside chat. So please, if anything pops into people's heads, feel free to type it down, and we should have a bit of time to get around to it. I'd like to welcome Dr. Dominic Crotty. He's Senior Principal Engineer in Imaging and Data Science in Stryker. Dominic, you're very welcome if you're there.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can indeed. Welcome, and I suppose we'll start by maybe letting you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Niall. Yeah, I'm actually thrilled to be here. This is a fantastic event. I'm really glad to be a part of it. For those of you who are expecting the VP of Global Research, David Talon, I sincerely apologize. I had to step in for him at the last moment. I'm a Corkman, and then Cork by birth, right? And then went to UCC and did electrical engineering as an undergrad. And luckily, when I graduated around 1996, I was lucky enough that rugby was turning professional. So I actually managed to snag one of those first rugby professional contracts. Played rugby for around 10 years for Munster and Ireland, and then headed off to America. I jumped before I was pushed, as I say, because other players were coming up, but those were great days in rugby, especially particularly Munster rugby. I then went to the United States, to Duke University, where I completed a PhD in biomedical engineering in the area of breast cancer imaging research. So we were developing a dual modality SPECT CT breast cancer imaging device. So that was really, really interesting. After that, then I went to a place called Waukesha in Wisconsin to work for GE Healthcare in their CT development. Now, if you had told me 15 years ago that I'd end up in a place called Waukesha, I would have said you were smoking something. A, because I didn't think that any such place existed, and B, because it was Wisconsin, where the winters were just absolutely brutal. But the technology was amazing, and while I was there, I grew to lead the development of radiation dose optimization algorithms that are on GE CT's premium level CT. So they're used every day in Irish hospitals today. So that type of technology really, really got me interested in medical imaging and in medical device design. But having 3 kids over there, our kids were getting older, and it was coming to the stage where I really wanted them to grow up Irish. And so we decided to come home, and I was very, very lucky that there's such an innovative and world-class R&D center for neurosurgery in Cork at Stryker, out in Carrigtwohill. And so I got chatting to Dave, and Dave said that they were starting to build a data science team to try to incorporate all this data that is in these neurosurgical procedures. And so I accepted the role of senior principal engineer in Cork, and that's where I've been now for the last 15 months. Timed it well with COVID just hitting just after we came home. So things have been slowly ramping up, but we're at the point where we're developing a team now, a small team in Cork, to start this whole foray into data science in the OR.
Wow, you've had about three careers, it sounds like there. And talk us through then data science in the theatre and the OR. Like, what is it? What are the applications of it, I suppose? Yeah,
so I think possible applications. Possible is the operative word there. Many of the opportunities exist in theory. They're very, very hard to implement in practice. Due to practical considerations and technical hurdles. Regulatory concerns, et cetera, et cetera. But putting aside that for the moment, data science is a very broad term as well, and the OR is filled with opportunities for collecting and for adding value back from the data that is collected. But I'll concentrate on the sectors that are most pertinent to me, which is neurosurgery, including spine surgery and brain surgery. But I think, to be fair, the opportunities here are mirrored across, various different anatomical areas. I listened with fantastic interest in what you guys were talking about with your AI for colorectal cancer. And I think, a lot of the same principles exist. But in neurosurgery, the possible opportunities are myriad and diverse throughout the patient and the device pathway. But I'll concentrate primarily on three sectors: the proprietary data science, or the data science for proprietary R&D instrumentation that Stryker concentrates on trying to improve our products. Then analytics that can be shared with the management, hospital management, and then the area that is most sort of visible to everybody and really is most important in many respects is the treatment ordered research area of data science. So the patient surgeon pathway. So starting off with R&D, that really is the lowest hanging fruit. You've got devices in the OR, and you can connect up your devices and you can extract that data. So if you do develop that device ecosystem and manage to get the data, let's say, to a cloud, then in a coordinated and formulated fashion, R&D engineers internally can analyze how their devices are being used, when their devices are being used, and for how.
The volume is gone there. Is it gone for everyone else?
Yeah. Have we lost Dominic? He's on mute. Oh, there you go.
I'm unmuted now.
Sorry, you're back.
I'm good.
Good.
Great. You can get that type of analysis. How your systems are being used, whether they're up to the task, are they being used, or are competitors? Are their devices being used, and why is that? You can also detect the surgical phase of a surgery as well, potentially through use of your devices. In terms of software, how are your users using your software? What is your workflow? Are there repeated efforts at a particular point in the workflow that are symptomatic of an issue with your workflow, or do some things work better than others? You can track the location of instruments so that the surgical team does not have to continually chase down instruments prior to a procedure. I'm thinking mostly here in terms of, mobile imaging units such as Stryker's Aero CT, or maybe even, Medtronic's O-arm system, GE's cone beam CT devices. Smart equipment management, being able to spot trouble with devices remotely before they actually happen in the OR, remote software upgrades. Data science for hospital management, you can analyze things such as start and stop times to find out, what are the typical length of a procedure. Are some surgical teams longer than others? Are some procedures longer than others? Particularly in the US, I can see where management can maybe analyze particular surgeons in terms of their productivity compared to their cohort at the hospital. Do they measure up against their cohort, or do they measure up regionally, etc. If you track patient reported outcomes, you can track readmission rates or infection rates. Patient reported outcomes are incredibly important, as you can imagine. I think that's an area in Ireland where we can get better in trying to complete the picture of data science in the OR. But then the one that is most interesting in many respects, and certainly most pertinent for this group, is data science for the surgeon and the patient in the OR. It really has the most of everything. It has the most promise for impact on the patient, but also has the most challenges in terms of acceptance or efficacy. It also has the highest privacy and legal barriers. So I'll just concentrate on navigated spine surgery and in brain surgery. So I see opportunities, and particularly in terms of surgical planning. There's such heterogeneity in how surgeons approach spine surgeries. Your typical procedures that what we want to do is we want to try to make that more of a science and less of an art in some respects. So through analysis, through collection of data in navigated spine surgery, particularly in surgical planning, we can analyze retrospectively what the plan versus actual screw placement was. That may impact it, particularly when you start to combine that with patient-reported outcomes on movement and on mobility afterwards, 3, 6, 12 months down the line. You can start to analyze, okay, why was Mr. Smith, why is his movement not as good as Mrs. Jones, right? I mean, there are other factors. That's what makes it such an interesting challenge, is that it's multifactorial. But this is certainly one area. Was there a breach in the pedicle wall due to misplacement of the screw? So you can reduce areas through the use of smart technology. You can put maybe things like you can alert the surgeon when they're coming towards critical structures, right? You can use track devices for improved visualization techniques, integration of imaging in real time to guide surgery. And one thing which I don't think is really, and which is dear to my heart, is we don't really track the radiation dose to the patient and to surgeons during surgery. And I think, that's something that'll maybe come more and more into focus. And if we don't collect that data and if we don't analyze that data, then we won't be able to reduce dose to the patient. Imaging is becoming more and more of an integral part of surgery, particularly 3D imaging. So there are all these things. Ultimately, we want to go down the route of clinical decision support tools. So we'll pool all this data from hundreds of procedures across all these different types of patient demographics, surgical, skill levels, to be able to do things like risk stratification or outcome prediction for the different types of surgery. So that's only spine surgery. These things are mirrored in brain surgery, where we can segment tumors, again, do more surgical planning, multimodal registration of different imaging modalities. In some ways, the list is endless, but it is constrained by practicalities. And I know we'll probably talk about that later. But I do think that data science, outside of those specific areas, can disrupt things like training. For you, Niall, as a trainee, as a surgeon in training, the old adage of what was it, C1, teach one, or whatever. Yeah. That probably doesn't apply to you much anymore, right? I mean, clinicians are extremely busy. And, so if you can use data science to create, just like they were doing in ERCAD there, create, AR or VR models, so you can fly through, specific patient, data sets. I mean, those things are within touching distance, right? We probably have the data to do it. It's a matter of actually perfecting it. We can generate evidence-based best practice so that you can follow the best practice for a certain procedure. Transparency in the OR is another area which, for surgeons may be seen as a double-edged sword, but I think it will ultimately improve performance. I think we have to maybe reform our legal system in this regard to really put safeguards for surgeons. So I think this is the type of thing that really will ultimately help patients as well as surgeons. So the list goes on and on and on, and I know I've gone on for a long while, but these are all areas where I think data science can have an impact.
And you mentioned kind of almost an infinite number of points of data there that you could take. Is the plan just collect all the data and then we'll kind of work out what we do with that data, and the potential good and the potential risky things that might show us, and does that kind of build into the clinical challenges? Is it hospitals that don't want you to do this? Is it surgeons that don't want you to do it for a fear of what might be uncovered?
Yeah, I think, well, I will say that I agree with that I do think that there is an issue there. And I think it's a real issue, in fairness to surgeons and to hospitals in our litigious society. I do think there needs to be safeguards put in place. And maybe that's one area that the Irish government can help with innovation in the future. But you're right in sort of suggesting that we don't quite know yet what we will do with this data. I think we do have to collect the data first and do an initial sort of survey of what we can do with the data, before we know exactly what we do. But it's expensive to do that, right? Data today is very expensive to collect. I've been involved in a project that has gone on for months and months, maybe 9 months to get it set up, between relationship building and setting out the contract, and then we were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for image data, because it takes a ton of time to procure the data, particularly anonymize the data, which I think is a major issue, label the data, which again is a huge issue, and then wrangling and storing the data, and so to go along with that, then you have like privacy concerns, right? Which are surmountable technical challenges in imaging, but it appears at times that whenever we work with hospitals, that you have to reinvent the wheel every single time when you try to get image data, because they don't have a standardized anonymization approach, and that makes acquiring clinical data an issue.
Yeah, so I was going to say, what can hospitals or universities do to better enable this? Is it making better access to the data? Is it that they should be doing it, or allowing you guys easier access to it? Like, what does that look like as far as you see it?
Yeah, great question. I think to be fair, I mean, just like everything else, to make Ireland a sort of a global leader in this area, which I think it can be. I see no reason why Ireland can't be a global leader in surgical data science. I think you guys with your work on colorectal cancer are showing the way how it can be done. World-class, technologies and insights. We also have to work with government as well. I think government have a role here to play in a small country like Ireland, which is a sort of a self-contained and a nice-sized problem, as it were. Potentially you could set up a sort of a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, where you have like-minded people that come together. Maybe they share a particular concern for a single issue, and that that the techniques that you're going to be using are innovative. So you set up that regulatory sandbox, and then you have universities and hospitals working together to make sure that anonymization techniques are there on a standardized basis, that you have standardized informatics systems, so that you can collect data in a standardized way and formatted way, so that it makes it easy for analysis. That's why there's been so much improvement in medical imaging, is because you have the DICOM format, which facilitates easy interpretation, transfer, storage, etc. Interpretability is massive. So those are all things that can be done. I think it is, like everything else here, a collaboration. I do think universities have to potentially reduce red tape to R&D collaborations, maybe making a standardized legal template for innovation in the OR. Again, actively invite collaboration. I think you guys are in a good spot with UCD, right? Which is a very innovative university. Potentially use federated learning for AI model development, right? Federated learning is where the data never actually leaves the environment of the hospital. And I think Ireland is very well set up for that, particularly with our NIMS system and medical imaging, at least, is that you could do that type of model development where the data never leaves the actual institution, but you share and you distribute the AI model development. So those are the types of things that I think can happen.
And then I think one last question, the next level on from the data going for the research is what comes of that data, and it's probably a technology or something that is going to change how we provide healthcare. And how do you see Ireland being in a position to enable patients earlier access to these technologies, or to be kind of involved in the early phases of what comes out of all of that data, which I don't think we are currently particularly good at?
Yeah. Well, I think first is sort of a mindset change that has to happen, which, I think is slowly happening. I mean, when I was growing up, somebody who had a PhD was just somebody who didn't want to enter the workforce, right? Whereas now we, at least that mindset is changing, where we encourage people to get advanced training. And I think that's really, really good. So if you take medical device development as an entire ecosystem, and education being the bedrock, then that is what we need to have happen. So that at the earliest stage, let's get education going. Let's do, as well as doing the PhDs and the masters, let's also, for people who are mature and are in the workforce, let's do short-term targeted training programs to help them transition, to help initiate best practice. You know, so I think that's massive, right?
Who runs those? Who runs those?
Sorry, say it again.
Who runs those?
So ICT SkillNet are running, you know, some really good targeted training programs. I will say that I think there's even room for improvement there, in the sense that some of those are a year long or 2 years long, which data science is progressing so rapidly that you really need a very, very quick, almost like a boot camp of sorts. And so I think there needs to be a sort of a government, because I think, you know, I don't mean to say that everything is government driven in Ireland, but I do think that there is room for government here to provide safeguards to companies to quote unquote lose their employees for 12 weeks or whatever while they are being trained in a quick manner. I think that would be interesting. I think NIMS is a wonderful model for early stage development. If we can harness that, I think that would be an absolute game changer, because imaging underlies so much of these new developments in the OR. You know, there barely is a technology that I can think of in the OR that doesn't have imaging at its core. And I think, you know, if we can capture what is the massive opportunity that we have with a coordinated national imaging network, I think it would be huge. I know radiologists in the United States who I've talked to who just are incredulous when we say that we have a coordinated national medical imaging network. But I do think, you know, as a sort of an overall statement, we would be catapulted to the next level if we had a coordinated academic clinical industry partnership, maybe with a sort of what would you call, like a moon race of sorts, right? DTIFs are great, but let's create a target that in 2030, we want to solve a particular problem. Maybe it's brain surgery, you know, and have people working on it. Or maybe it's not just one, but like a couple of them. That we want to be, Ireland wants to be the center of brain surgery research, something along those lines, you know, to really put a target that is identifiable, is achievable, you know, and focuses the mind.
Great. One really quick question has come here is interesting. In your opinion, in digital surgery space, what's next? Is it imaging, cameras, AI? What's the next step?
Well, I think AI is already happening. I think, you know, multimodal imaging is going to be huge. Handheld, you know, or you know, radiation-based imaging. So, you know, and also I have to say wearables. So to complete that patient pathway, I think wearables are going to be a really, really big growth area as well. So that, you know, not just the 3-month or the 6-month snapshot follow-up for a patient, but you get that continuous monitoring of patient outcomes, so that you learn how the patient is doing on a day-to-day basis. And then, you know, that sort of completes the picture, because after the OR, we often, to my understanding, we often lose track of patients, and we need to complete that cycle. So I think wearables will be massive.
Okay, listen, Dominic, thank you very much. We're just at time there. Thank you for all your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a fantastic forum.
Thank you very much. And I'm just seeing here, I'm told that the new UCD Professional Academy is running training courses similar to what we discussed there. So anyone who's interested could have a look at that. Very good. Perfect. Thank you very much, Dominic. Take care.
Thank you.
So now our final keynote speaker of the day is Dr. John O'Dea, CEO of Pagliari, to talk from an SME's perspective of opportunities and challenges for business in Ireland. You're very welcome, John.
Thanks very much. Let's see, can I get this screen up here? Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that looks
good.
Do you want to go full presenter view, maybe?
Full screen now, yeah. And I think I have to do this.
Perfect.
Very good. Well, just before I kind of get into my own talk here, it's just one thing that occurs to me to listening to a lot of the conversation is that really this whole area of AI and image processing, that it's a tremendous opportunity for the whole third level institution infrastructure to create tremendous value, because, you know, we work with industry, we work in industry with third level institutions and hospitals all the time. We tend to work with a doctor that has an idea but really doesn't have the kind of infrastructure to bring that idea out to a marketed clinical device. And the hospitals are a fertile source of ideas with innovative surgeons that we love working with. But here, this is really the product actually is owned almost by the hospital in this instance, because it's the imaging data and it's the analysis of that data, and really all that can be done within the educational institution. All the know-how capabilities to develop the product can be developed within the university. I mean, I liken it a bit to diagnostics. Diagnostics can really be developed a long way within an education institution and really be just about commercializable, quarter one in a transfer, because they can be developed and tested. And similarly, pattern recognition, AI, the raw material isn't plastic and metal, it's images that are taken during surgery. And the wherewithal is absolutely within the academic system to analyze that, develop algorithms and test them. And as Dominic alluded to, it's very expensive for companies that really don't have access to that data to go buy that data, whereas the hospitals and the universities have it for free, as it were, and can really mine that and develop we're always looking to commercialize research. A lot of money goes into research. You'd like that rolling back into the system, into the research system, into the universities and hospitals. And so I think actually this dawn of AI creates tremendous opportunity for the third level institutions to create tremendous value for themselves. I mean, I've seen this in Medtronic with the Genius system they brought out recently, and I'm familiar with other similar efforts that have been really 100% developed within the hospital and university environment, and create tremendous value. So anyway, moving on, today Ronan was kind enough to ask me to give a talk on my perspective on the capabilities of the medical device industry in Ireland now, and what's missing. So just a little bit about us. We're a SME. We've been on the go now about 2.5 years, and our focus is on advancing the state-of-the-art in smoke evacuation and insufflation technologies for all those types of surgery. We're based in Galway, and our principal focus has been the development of a novel insufflator called EVA 15, which was FDA cleared last year. And we're working very closely with UCD and a number of other partners in looking to improve safety of surgery on COVID-infected patients, and trying to protect OR staff from aerosolized virus. So in thinking about this, I thought it would be helpful just to start with a bit of history of MedDev in Ireland. And really, back in the 70s and 80s, we had a strong buildup of multinational companies in Ireland, particularly along the western seaboard. I mean, we had a few, and I think really the inflection point for me was when Boston Scientific took over the old digital facility in Galway. There was a lot happened subsequent to that, and so we had it in the 70s, 80s, but that was really when it kicked off in a very serious way. Like, I think back to the days where you know, Parkmore, you had 1 or 2 facilities. You had the Bard facility and a lot of grass, and maybe the early bit of Craigana there. And you know, I think when Boston came, it was really that acceleration happened. And in the 70s and 80s, you started then to see the emergence of indigenous suppliers to the MNCs, you know, people that could make catheters, people that could make the various parts that went into the MNCs devices. In the mid-80s then, we really had the emergence of the first Irish end user device startups, you know, people that were making products that were going to be, you know, used by doctors as opposed to integrated into devices to be used by doctors. And so Mednova would have been one of the first, Caradyne, which I founded, and Aerogen. In the 90s then, I suppose you start to have the first exits of those device startups and propagation of the staff from them into new startups. And I always say to engineers that come to work with us that, you know, the best way to do a startup is to learn how to do a startup in a startup. And, you know, there are certain skills and ways of working that you learn and observe in a startup environment that you may not see as readily in a large company. I think in the 90s, we start to see more emergence of venture capital in Ireland. We dedicated biomedical engineering degrees. And I think within IBEC, the Irish Medical Device Association has played an important role in gluing together all the disparate strands within the industry, be they multinationals and startups, now known as Irish MedTech. And then as we moved into the noughties, you know, we start to see a lot of government funding going into the likes of Curum. SFI is putting a lot of money into the system, DTIF, which we've talked about. I think European funding for SMEs improved a lot over the last 10 years. The BioInnovate program, which was set up by Ian Quinn, who sadly passed away recently, and you know, funded by Enterprise Ireland, brought a tremendous new resource, I suppose, to the startup infrastructure in Ireland. The third level support infrastructure, you know, the money has gone in from government to put, you know, support for smaller companies in place. And I suppose we've started to see the emergence of digital health companies. We've moved beyond the traditional metal and plastics medical device. So where are we 40 years on, I suppose, in terms of startups? Well, first of all, there's an awful lot of them. Indeed, like when you can have a top 20, it means, just shows you how many there are that they can actually pick a top 20. So we certainly have a large number of startups. And I often say, like, if you imagine we've a population the size of Manchester, and how many startups are actually coming out of that, if it were a city, it would be tremendous. It's now internationally recognized as a hotbed for medical device startups. And what we see is founders coming from a variety of backgrounds. You know, early on, it tended to be engineers, and but now you're starting to see like doctors setting up startups a lot more often. Seed funding is readily available between angels, between Enterprise Ireland, Western Development Commission here in the West. It is actually reasonably easy now to get the show on the road. And you know that there's the benefit of greater mentorship opportunities from those who have traveled the road. I mean, there are very many people at this stage who have built and sold medtech companies. The testing support infrastructure has improved dramatically over the past number of years. You know, it used to be you have to go outside Ireland to do a lot of different types of testing. There's very little testing now we have to go outside the country to do. You know, biocompatibility and maybe electromagnetic compatibility, some of that sort of stuff we occasionally have to go outside the country. But, you know, there is facilities within Ireland to do the latter. I think founders bring the playbook of previous startups. A lot of people that do startups have worked in startups. They've seen what worked and they've seen what didn't work. And, you know, that knowledge that has been infused from working in startups, I think is a tremendous asset to new startups. And we're seeing more non-device startups, particularly in digital health. However, follow-on funding from seed round is still very challenging. I mean, you almost can be seduced into thinking it's easy to raise funding because you get through the seed round, but it can be very challenging on the rounds thereafter. And I think this has led to an increased importance for EU funding and DTIF funding. And, you know, I think Ireland has done an extremely good job in raising, our Irish startups have done an extremely good job in raising money out of the SME investment vehicles in Europe. And indeed, DTIF has been a tremendously useful addition to the funding landscape over the past number of years. So, like, where do we sit in terms of skill sets for startups? I mean, in fundraising, I don't think we do too bad a job. R&D, again, you know, we've had great education from the multinationals in this country, and really, you know, whereas I talk about startup skills and picking them up in a startup, I really think that we all developed our skills in R&D and manufacturing and quality, largely from having worked from the best medical device companies in the world, which all happen to be here in Ireland. So, I mean, they really have been the universities of medical device designers for many years now. Where we're probably less capable of is in regulatory affairs, clinicals, reimbursement, health technology assessment, marketing and business development. So in some senses, the things we're really good at are the things that we'd have picked up working in multinationals, and many of us would have worked in multinationals before doing a startup. But some of these other aspects, which are more market facing, are skill sets that are probably not our strongest as a country. So there is great support infrastructure growing every year. I mean, I was just so excited to see the new GMIT MET center. You know, they just received 840 grand to put in a fantastic imaging system. I mean, you know, you had like even big companies that were having to go abroad to get imaging work in neurovascular done. Now they can just do it on their doorstep. Absolutely fantastic to see this sort of infrastructure. I think, you know, from our own standpoint in surgery, what Ronan Cahill and his team have developed in a matter is something that's quite unique, with the, you know, the close proximity of preclinical and clinical studies. And Curum obviously is a group that is providing a lot of support to different companies. So when we get to commercializing, well, I suppose the story isn't as good here. I think it is pretty much a truism to say that for most medtech companies, their first market is outside of Ireland. And, you know, maybe digital health can be an exception, but the reality is that sales and marketing skills have to be developed in foreign markets, because it's extremely difficult to sell products into the HSE as a startup. You're almost precluded by virtue of like having 3 years of profitable accounts. And, you know, there are very few startups that ever get profitable, to be honest, before they're probably acquired. And I think we can maybe look at what's going on in the UK to maybe give us some guidance in this regard. You know, could a small percentage of the HSE materials budget be allocated for new technologies, be allocated for SMEs? You know, we have the Health Innovation Hub, which is a good scheme for allowing companies to kick the tires of their device within a clinical environment. And, you know, and then you get a report, and then there ends most of the time the relationship with the HSE. And I mean, is it possible this could actually become part of a continuum where, you know, as you work through HIA, there could be some money put aside that, you know, if innovations have been shown to be valuable to the health system, you know, that there would be some way that SMEs that don't meet the requirements, financial requirements that are typically requested, could be able to get into the system, so to speak. It's NHS have this interesting innovation and technology payment scheme, accelerated access collaborative, as they call it. And really, this is quite interesting when you read the lines there. They're a little small to read there, but they more or less said the program supports the NHS to adopt innovations by removing some of the financial and procurement barriers to introducing new technologies. So even they admit it's hard in England, but they have a scheme to allow that. And speaking as a company like that would have sold a bit into the NHS, we found that very helpful, because it helped our product get into the NHS, because we'd face the same difficulties with the NHS as we would with HSE. Device trials, really, you know, I think if you're designing products in Ireland, you really would like to be doing your trials in Ireland. It has so many benefits, not least of which is you can kind of go do some cases and come home the same day. There still are very few being conducted in Ireland. I think, you know, we have a new body now, which has just started up in June, the new National Research Ethics Committee. It seems to offer more deterministic review timelines, and that's something, you know, we're already engaged with NREC now on a submission, and we'll see how that all goes. But it has brought something that's very deterministic. My experience over the last number of years is that hospital-based ethics committee are they're kind of a black hole. You go in and you hope that your application will come out at some stage, and you never know when. There does seem to be a very deterministic review timelines associated with NREC now. So I think that's a valuable new addition to the scheme. The biggest issue I have, and this isn't really just an Irish issue, but it's an EU issue, is that we don't have an approval process that's risk-based. So, for instance, HIPRA, you know, has to be applied to for even a class 1 device if it's sterile. You know, the only issue is whether the device is sterile. But when you go into the process, you might as well be going in with a TAVI valve. You know, the process is identical for a stethoscope and for a TAVI valve. And that's just a waste of resources in a way. It's tough on companies. I mean, the amount of documentation you're supplying for, you know, devices that are trivially safe. You know, HIPAA probably shouldn't be having to be reviewing. I know when we did one recently, there was almost a, why are you sending this to us? But, you know, this is what the MDR is going to do now. We're going to have all these very, very simple, safe, basic trials being done, and they're going to run through the same system that has to look at much more critically products that they're much more safety critical than that. So an interesting dynamic that's also coming out, of course, is the new UK CA mark, which is akin to the old CE mark. And I think it's going to give the UK an interesting advantage in terms of when new technology would become available. The medical device regulation that's come in, I mean, in truth, it's not a lot different than what we used to do under the old CE mark. It's just that the 2 million devices that are on the market have all to be recertified, and they're going to completely plug up the whole regulatory infrastructure for years to come. So it's a very worrying development in that standpoint. You know, really a device that's been safe for the last 15 years didn't become unsafe because a new regulation was released. But this is something that I think we're only going to begin to see. It just came into effect about 2 weeks ago. So like it's interesting with the CA mark. It's like the old CE mark. Once you have a quality system, you just have to register your device and off you go. And I mean, so we'll end up being able to do trials with products that are commercially available in that market. As they're really like they just become like post-market surveillance trials. So this is as much an EU issue as an Irish one, but we're in the EU and the UK isn't. And so, you know, I talk about these issues in terms of Ireland, they really are European issues. And I think that the MDR is really going to impact the creativity and ability for European companies to compete and get technology before the US. You know, I think the US FDA approach is much more sensible. You know, they take non-significant risk devices and significant risk devices and treat them differently. I wonder, is this something we could do in Ireland? I mean, without, because this seems to be more like a regulatory requirement that isn't necessarily, I don't know, there may be a way that we could do this locally. The question, of course, is, do we want more trials in Ireland? I mean, I've never been in a hospital that isn't overly busy. So whereas we might talk about wanting to do trials, you know, you don't find too many doctors and surgeons who say, yeah, I've loads of time, love to do that. You know, can we support more trials in Ireland? Are we going to plug the system up, for instance, with all these trials that are going to be done for the sake of doing trials, for the sake of releasing 20-year-old devices onto a market in accordance with MDR? You know, the great benefits of device trials are that it's early access to patients for new technologies. You know, the MDR is going to put Europe behind the US in terms of regulatory approval timelines. And, you know, again, this is a European issue rather than an Irish issue. But nevertheless, what it means is now that, you know, companies in Ireland will be looking to the US as their launch market. And, you know, that shouldn't be that way. Finally, I suppose one point I would make, I mean, I found, at least in the US, that having MD, PhD degrees, it really encourages the pulling of trials into hospital versus the pushing of trials into hospital. In other words, I've always found that, you know, doctors that are doing PhD degrees, they're looking for studies. They need studies for their PhD. So you can feel the pull when you have new technology. We want to do trials on that. Whereas, you know, really in this part of the world, you're kind of pushing trials into hospitals, trying to fit them into people's schedules. And it's a very different dynamic. Business development. Well, can we leverage the co-location of multiple startups and multiple MNCs in the one small space? And I think we can. And, you know, Irish MedTech, formerly IMDA, has been a fantastic melting pot for small companies to get to know big companies. And, you know, I think we have a unique thing going on here where that there is you know, as I say, it's like one big UK city. We have like 15 of the top 20 medical device companies in the world, and all these startups. You know, there's no better opportunity for an Irish startup to get heard by a business development executive in the US, or if they're based in Ireland. Most of them tend to be based in the US. I mean, we all know that, you know, us Irish, we do try to help each other out when we can. And, you know, I've never experienced a case where I haven't gone to someone in a multinational and said, listen, who should I be talking to in business development about this product? I mean, and not only will they tell you, but they'll generally give you an email introduction. Obviously, then you're out in the big bad world with them. But, you know, we have a better opportunity than just about any country I can think of in doing that. And indeed, now I'm involved in an initiative that's just underway at the moment from the American Chamber of Commerce to see, can we get, you know, some of the companies that are in Ireland to help some of the startups, or at least get them into those companies' business development chains. So we have a unique channel advantage, really do, in Ireland. I think another thing that's important, though, is the company ready for a relationship with an MNC? You know, and one of the things I've seen now over the last little while, you have people that are coming out into the consulting business that, you know, have ran worldwide material sourcing for the likes of, you know, Medtronic or Boston Scientific. These people would have essentially, you know, approved every vendor to those companies over the last 10, 15, 20 years. There's a tremendous knowledge set that, you know, can be leveraged off and possibly through Enterprise Ireland, through the mentorship scheme, to leverage off, you know, what you need to be before you go to an MNC. You know, what level are your quality systems like? You know, what do you need to know before you come in the door of a Boston Scientific, for example? Those people are out there now, and I think they are a very valuable resource, because, you know, you don't want to go. You'll probably get one good chance, you know, so you don't want to blow it. So in conclusion, I think all the pieces are in place to develop an SME medtech company in Ireland right now. I mean, I've seen this industry evolve from, you know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, where, you know, there was two or three startups in this space, to now where you're seeing like 10, 15 a year coming out, and, you know, and they accumulate as the years go on. I do think, you know, that if there was some possibility to tweak the regulatory pathways for trials, we could create a competitive advantage for Ireland in performing trials. In terms of early commercialization, you know, most of us are selling, you know, we start building sales from Ireland rather than to Ireland. And, you know, it would be so much more powerful and enabling for SMEs if those initial sales could be into the HSE. Not necessarily saying they have to be permanent, not saying that the HSE should have to fly the national flag and all that, but more that, you know, at least you get a chance to get in the door and sell product. Okay, if you're kicked out 6 months later, so be it. You know, you know, you're probably not going to do any better when you go to America or wherever. But, you know, I suppose as companies develop, they try to get that sort of stuff out of the way before they're going in the door of a hospital rather than after it. So, and finally, you know, there is an ability to leverage off co-location with multinationals through involvement in the likes of the Irish MedTech Association and so on. And really, it's a great opportunity for SME companies to meet with R&D and business development people from the biggest medical device companies in the world, and they are all willing to help. So thank you very much for your time today.
That's fantastic, John. Thank you. Such a comprehensive run through there. Very interesting to see. You've done most of it, I think, at this stage, probably, by the sounds of things. Someone was asking, what do you see as the typical end game for an Irish SME? Is it scale up, sell off, get more funding, any mixture of the above?
The reality is, if you're VC funded, you're being prepared to sell as soon as that money comes in. You know, that is the reality. You know, if you look at one of our most successful indigenous companies, Aerogen, like it's not irrelevant that it wasn't VC funded. So yeah, I think that that's the reality, you know, and Listen, it's not a bad thing, you know, as I mentioned early on. SMEs spawn other SMEs, and you know, if you get that multiplicative effect, you know, it probably is already being seen in what's going on right now.
Perfect. John, I'm going to move on in the interest of time to the panel, but I know what you've been speaking about will be of major interest to all of them from various different perspectives. So we've got Miss Claire Harney, Executive Director of Health Tech Ireland, Miss Imelda Lamkin, Manager of DTIF Enterprise Ireland, Professor Patricia Maguire, Director of UCD Institute for Discovery and Co-Director for UCD Conway Sphere Research Group, Ms. Siobhan Manning, Innovation Manager at the Mater Misericordiae, and also Mr. Enda Mulvaney, Digital Surgery Lead for Medtronic. And I think the way we do it is I'll ask each of you 1 or 2 questions, if that's okay, and then we can move to more general questions for everyone for maybe the second half. Enda, we might start with you, perhaps, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your thoughts on today, what you've heard so far.
Yeah, cheers. Now, before I introduce myself, can I just compliment everyone so far today? It's been an incredible morning, really interesting to see the research, and then listening to Dominic and John in the afternoon there. I think it has set the scene lovely for this conversation. And so my own background, I'm 11 years now with Medtronic, predominantly spent my time in the surgical innovations business. And since February this year, I moved over to lead the new digital surgery business that we acquired last year. So it's an area I'm extremely passionate about and have been banging the table for many years about the use of digital and data to empower surgery. What have I heard today? I've written down a lot of stuff actually today. So I'm hearing a lot around research and innovation, and I suppose where I sit on the commercial side, I've written down innovation to implementation. And, you know, John has kind of flowed nicely into this conversation, what he was just saying. And, you know, we heard Leo Varadkar talk this morning about the funding given towards research and innovation. I suppose the challenge I throw down is, where's the funding for implementation? I think that's a major challenge, you know, once you get to a scalable solution. I do passionately believe, you know, Ronan talked about this morning, about the need for continuous improvement. And I think, you know, in my journey in the surgery world on the commercial side, I've seen what I call surgery 1.0 in open surgery into 2.0 with minimally invasive, robotics being 3.0, and now we are right on the cusp of 4.0. Which is digital surgery. And I think the thing that ties all this together for me is what was said this morning around the ability to synchronize data. And I think that's where, in the world I live in, everything we do, we look at data as just, this is patient's information, really, at the end of the day. And so we design everything with security in mind. And I think trying to retrofit is a challenge. So I think anyone who goes into this space really needs to think about, you know, how they manage data, and, you know, compliments again to the team who produced the paper on My Bicycle or Our Park, because I think it really starts a conversation that needs to be had in Ireland. Now, my own role embraces the whole EMEA region, and I'm looking at countries from Germany all the way down to Ireland, you know, different scale, different populations. But I see a completely different way of managing data and how data is standardized. And I really think Ireland, with our scale in this country, I think we can become an exemplar in healthcare as to how data is managed. And I suppose that'll be one thing I'd love to see happen short term, and not be thinking 2025 or 2030, really to start putting tangible goals in place that can be achieved here. And thinking about, and I know Claire is very passionate about this from our work together in Health Tech Ireland, you know, the whole patient identifier piece, and how can that anonymization at source happen? Because I do think there's fear, and I think there's fear on every side, and whether that's, you know, the space I'm in is kind of black box technology, you know, where you're capturing surgical video data, and there is a fear surgically around Big Brother watching. I talk about transparency, you know, there's so many other, Ronan talked about aviation this morning. You know, that there's so much can be learned, you know, from video data. But then you have the whole legal challenges. And again, you know, Dominic talked about this. If I talk to hospitals in Ireland, it's a different approach everywhere. If I go to a country like Belgium, hospitals will have group agreements. So one person to talk to, move on. And it just means innovations can become scaled much quicker. And then you look at scalability, as I said, the funding piece. And when I look at it from a research side, Digital Surgery, who we acquired a year ago, similar to the work we're talking about here today, this started in Imperial College in London. And I do think that's where, you know, John has some great examples of this, where you can start small, but you have to think big and think global as well. If you just stay local, then your idea only ever stays a dream. So I really do think that's where a commercial element has to come to the table early to empower, let's say, the scientists and the engineers to really ask those tough questions. I kind of the Shark Tank mentality. You know, do we keep funding or do we just have to fail fast? And then you have the whole challenge around route to market. You know, we do talk about HTAs and, you know, the different regulatory standards in every country. And I do think that that needs to be wrapped up here. And, you know, I've worked for years with the NHS, and yes, they have the early route to market for new technologies, but it's not always easy. Or if you don't know about it, you can't access it. And I'll finish on this cooperation. And I think Prof. Cahill has heard me talk about cooperation many times, but I'm a big believer in, you know, sometimes when industry get brought to the table, trust becomes a big issue as to what's the agenda. I think, you know, I only look at my own business here in Medtronic, and I look at the mission that was written in 1960. And the first thing Medtronic talk about every day is the patient. And it's, you know, and it's something I would say, should there be a fourth pillar to this conversation around academic, industry, research, and patients? Because at the end of the day, is it the patient who owns the data? So, you know, for me, you know, AI is an exciting tool, and I want to put that word in inverted commas. It is a tool. It is not something to fear. It is there to support people, but it is not the solution. And I think the solution is about using digital technology and everybody working together, whether it's in academia, clinically, or in industry, to bring these digital solutions to the fore to improve the standard of training and to improve patient outcomes.
Thank you very much, Anna. That's pretty comprehensive. I think we move on. We'll come back to you. I have a question or two. Maybe we might get to you at the end once we've heard from everyone, if that's all right. But thank you very much. Maybe Claire next. I know a lot of what Enda will have said and also what John will have said there will kind of resonate with you. And where does Health Tech Ireland fit into all of this?
Yeah, well, so Health Tech Ireland is, you know, representing digital devices and diagnostic industry here in Ireland. And in a nutshell, our key goal is to enable market access. So, but a lot of the issues around getting market access in Ireland have been discussed by the various speakers today in excellent talks. The keynotes were fantastic. So well done to everyone. Very interesting learnings for me. I've written some notes here on it, and what Enda said just there about, you know, innovation to implementation. So there are a number of steps along the way in between that. There's the research, and sometimes it's difficult to conduct research here in Ireland. And that's usually around the availability of data, how expensive it is to capture that data, and then the quality of the data. And do you have permission? Again, who owns it? And, you know, our goal is to bring together industry with and represent at the highest levels of policy to try to ensure that those issues and barriers start to come down for the benefit of everyone. And I think that fourth pillar of the patient is really important, because evidence now is showing that patients and people absolutely support the use of their data in an appropriate manner. And they actually expect that their data is being used in an appropriate manner to facilitate advancement in healthcare for the greater good. So From the research step, then you might go to the trial or the pilot stage. And again, you face issues at that point. We have great capability now for developing small pilots, particularly around digital health, which can be sometimes easier to implement on a very small scale. But without the key partnerships and agreements in place early, commercial agreements in place early around scalability, that implementation at a national level can't happen. And at the moment, I think, you know, we've long suffered from death by pilot here in Ireland. We don't have a standardized evaluation tool for innovation. And if we had something like that, and it's something that's been researched and published by Health Tech Ireland in one of our most recent papers around procurement, we're not evaluating innovative solutions in such a way that there could be a sort of a standardized bar set that, you know, if the performance is above a certain level, that the scaling happens and that there is a mechanism for that to happen. We don't have that mechanism at present. And that's something that Health Tech Ireland is actively working towards in partnership with the HSE. And this partnership and collaboration is increasingly important now going forward. And we've recently signed an MOU with the HSE, with Martin Curley's department, in order to help channel innovations into the health system. And this is a new level of partnership and trust that we're beginning to see, and that willingness to work together. And I think we've seen the evidence of industry coming to the table during the pandemic and providing innovation fast, often free, during the pandemic to help. And we've also got a bank of evidence now of how well digital solutions can actually work and help. So, you know, it's really important that we don't roll back on that. But we still have those issues around data capture, and how do we manage data? How do we share it? How do we use it? And what permissions do we need in order to be able to do that? Consent, we're discovering, it's a dynamic thing, so it's not static, and it shouldn't really be just procedure based. So it shouldn't be based just around surgical procedures. It generally actually follows the entire patient pathway, the entire journey. And that is a really good way to involve people in their healthcare and in their procedures, and to be able to share their data appropriately and feel empowered. The idea of a centralized health record type database, you know, we've suffered a catastrophic cyber attack. Evidence would suggest that a federated approach to data storage may be safer. There's no need for a large centralized repository of data. There can be summarized, anonymized data, but data can be held locally where it's captured, with an interoperability infrastructure and framework nationally that allows appropriately credentialed researchers, industry, and healthcare providers to access and pull data that they are entitled to or need in order to provide care or to carry out research. So that data stays where it is until it's drawn up. And again, standards are key to that data, you know, being of high quality and actually being usable, especially when it's being pulled up from many different locations. And we have, you know, the Internet of Health things, so the wearable devices that people are using now, really, really rich source of data, but it's always on. So you will have heart rate recorded over a 6-month period on anyone with a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or any of those devices. Can that be used for research purposes? Absolutely. But the format of that data is really important. And, you know, can it be put into a format where it's comparable with other clinical data, for example? So, you know, we need to deploy things like AI to be able to use that data appropriately so that it actually is of help in research. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, but those technologies are there. Digital health is not the answer, it's the enabler. So, you know, digital surgery improving, and, you know, I was blown away by some of the earlier talks this morning about what can be done. And And, you know, as an enabler, an education tool, improved training, improved precision, it's a game changer. And as an enabler to improve outcomes, it's fantastic. And, you know, with the way the world is going, I know we hear it all the time. We have an aging population, a growing population. We now need to use those tools as enablers in order to be able to provide world-class care. And I would agree with all of the speakers that Ireland is primed to be a global leader in this space, given the size of our population and our demographic. So yeah, I think a lot of challenges ahead of us, but nothing that we can't achieve. And I think initiatives like this being discussed this morning around digital surgery is fundamental. It's one of the fundamental things that will bring us forward in this space. There's been some great evidence gathered from it, and we need to now use that and leverage that to scale and make it available to everyone.
Oh, that's great, Claire. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to you at the end, and I'm going to ask you, what would you most like to see happen after this conference? And end of year as well, the same. So you can have a think about it, and we'll come back to you. We'll do a rapid fire questions and answers. We might move on to Imelda next, if that's all right. Talking about enablers, certainly DTIF and Enterprise Ireland has enabled a lot of work to be done from our side of things here. Imelda, you might tell me a little bit about it and what's gone well so far and what have been the lessons learned.
Sure, thanks Niall, and very good afternoon. So maybe a couple of general points first on innovation and the innovation ecosystem, and then I'll talk a bit more about DTIF. But I suppose at Enterprise Ireland, we're working to a 5-year innovation strategy. And it's based on the premise that there is a real correlation between increased R&D investment and improved productivity. And so we have a very large company client base, and they range from everything along a spectrum of highly innovative companies and researchers, like many of you at a session like today, through to companies and teams that are only taking their first steps. And so we have an agenda really to increase the effectiveness of innovation undertaken by client companies, to increase the number of clients investing in innovation. And so we're developing a variety of tools, and actually Claire mentioned something there around the innovation sort of tools that we need in this country. And we're developing things like scorecards and roadmap tools and things like that. Then at the higher end of innovation, we administer the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund for government. And of course, this is a huge opportunity nowadays in Ireland. It's an opportunity for innovation at scale. It's a huge opportunity for any of Ireland's innovators, medical device or otherwise. And I suppose a key point is that the fund is collaborative in nature, and I think it comes back to several of your earlier speakers making the point around collaborative cooperation, etc. That here we now have a fund that targets the bringing together of small, medium enterprises, inventors, innovators, large multinational corporations, and our academic researchers, and even our medics, our surgeons, etc. And to us, it's that bringing together that brings the uniqueness to these projects. So I suppose what we see is that it should build on research in Ireland, and we've had very significant investment in the last decade or so. So we hope to leverage that investment and to do that for real economic impact. And of course, in an enterprise agency or the Department of Enterprise itself, what we're hoping to do is to enable companies to create jobs and to enable the companies to compete globally. And of course, in a sector like yours, I think you all understand that very well, only too well, I'm sure. So Niall had asked me to give an idea of, how's it going to date with the DTIF, and then just a few points on lessons that have been learned And I suppose the types of things that are going well, we've been delighted to see the mobilization of companies and the research community competing for funding. And to give you a feeling for that, it's the first time we've had a competitive fund for companies. And so for us, we weren't sure, will companies want to compete? Will they be capable of competing, for example, in the same way that they do with European funding? And here we have, 3 calls under our belt, and companies can do it. There's an appetite there and they want to do it. They're looking for this. So we believe it's working. We've approved 235 million euros of funding to date. And I suppose that's of a total 500 million euro budget. It varies across sectors from life sciences, medical devices, AI, through to manufacturing, energy, sustainability areas. And we've often said with our recent call, it's varying from space through to subsea drilling and everything in between. But I think you'll all be very aware it's absolutely dominated by life sciences and medtech. So what we would say in terms of what's going well for DTIF, it really appears to be working for you, for your communities. And so for us, that's a very interesting point. It's why is that, what's working, et cetera, et cetera. So just a couple of points then on sort of lessons learned. Many of the projects are actually led by small, medium enterprises, startup companies, university spin-outs, etc. And the types of thing we're seeing, they usually have seed funding in place. They have a highly disruptive project. It's high risk, high potential. But the companies themselves are very capable. They have very capable teams. They're looking for high growth. And they're all, you'd say, very positive learnings. But on the other side for us, we're really learning more as an agency as to whether they can fundraise, whether they can co-fund the projects, and actually can they really sustain research activity that's at such a large scale. Very interesting for us to see how that works in your type of a collaboration. Collaboration. It all comes back to that. And I suppose really what we see in terms of our learnings, the collaboration brings the real novelty to the projects. And what we're looking for is that that project is the sum of all parts. It can't be done without that partnership. There's a piece missing. So what we have seen is we see people trying to squeeze into something that looks like a partnership, but perhaps it's not really. Perhaps it's a sort of customer-supplier relationship traditionally, through to absolutely innovative collaborations, exactly what I think we want here. We've done one final point, I would say. We've carried out one pretty significant review of the fund. And so far, what we feel is that it's showing us that we're funding very disruptive innovation. It's showing us that in some cases, we're straying into what is defined out there as radical innovation rather than disruptive innovation. Innovation that may contribute to the market as it is, as opposed to creating new markets. And for us, we're beginning to look at, what next? How do we redefine? What changes could we make to the calls? Do we keep them as they are, or do we do something different? And we're thinking along the lines of, for example, theme-specific calls. So just a final point I would make for us, watching, say, a project like this colorectal cancer project, we see, Nature publications from your academic partners. We see new rounds of investment into the small, medium enterprise in your project. And we see a very high-end promoting of the project through a company like IBM. And to us, they're the exact types of things that we're looking for with a fund like this. We believe it's showing us that we're operating in the right circles, but we're absolutely conscious that we love to get your feedback. So I'm really interested in some of the speakers' comments earlier, for example, and I'd be happy to do a one-to-one with anybody to talk more detail as to what you all think is working with DTIF.
That's fabulous, thank you, Imelda. I'm sure there'll be people taking you up on that. If you don't mind, we'll move on to Patricia now. Thank you very much, Imelda, again. Patricia from UCD, and you might tell us about UCD's role in this and your experience in digital health innovation.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much. I just want to say everything that I've heard this afternoon from both our keynotes from Dominic and John, and also from my other fellow panelists has just resonated so closely. I can find myself nodding all the time to the points raised. But yeah, so I am here with my UCD hat on. I am the director of the UCD Institute for Discovery, and I'm also a professor in biomedical science in UCD. And in UCD Discovery, we have just launched the AI Healthcare Hub. And we are working very closely with UCD Research. So hopefully you've all know Colin McMahon and Kevin Murphy, who are key members of the team, and we're working around their health data campaign. And I suppose just to give you some background, one of the projects that we're currently incubating in the AI Healthcare Hub in UCD Discovery is a project called AI Preemie. And AI Preemie is a current finalist in the Science Foundation Ireland AI for Societal Good Challenge. And this is a program focused on finding novel diagnostics for preeclampsia. And just in one line, preeclampsia, just so that everybody knows, it can causes the death of 50,000 mothers and 500,000 babies every year. And another 5 million babies are born prematurely, sometimes as early as 25, 26 weeks of gestation from preeclampsia. So it's a devastating disease for the families and mothers and babies involved. And so the AI Preemie is working in collaboration actually with the 3 Dublin maternity hospitals, and that's covering 50% of all the births in Ireland. And right now it's a hybrid test. It's a blood test combined with data, combined together with machine learning, artificial intelligence, and that's working right now across these 3 very busy Dublin maternity hospitals, and actually got set up in the last year with all the issues around COVID, but that's working really well. And the idea is really to combine information at these critical times of delivery for the clinicians. So we like to think of it as rather than artificial intelligence, that we're almost augmenting the intelligence for clinicians at these right critical times. And so that's I suppose my background and experience with health innovations from a UCD perspective. I could talk all day about challenges and the big challenges. I think just really quickly, and you know, a lot of my fellow panelists have already touched on a lot of things, hence my fervent nodding. But you know, one thing that mightn't have really been touched on from an academic perspective is getting actually, you know, we're great at making algorithms and designing algorithms, but actually getting them into production in the real world. And, you know, avoiding this massive chasm of, you know, actually we can create algorithms, but implementation, and I know, I think it was Enda, my fellow panelist, was talking about implementation, but, you know, real world, getting it out of the lab and getting it into the real world. And we're very conscious about that in the AI Healthcare Hub. Another aspect, I suppose, that may not have been touched on already is bias and kind of avoiding bias associated with AI. And then, as everybody has talked about, is access to data. And you know, really, I suppose what drives us in the AI Healthcare Hub and in UCD is trying to give relevant patient information to clinicians where and when it's needed. I mean, that is really, you know, the patient is at the center of this. And what we found in the AI Healthcare Hub, especially on this project in the maternity hospitals, is that it's not just, and I think it was Claire who spoke about this earlier, it's not just, you know, data. It's actually this rich, holistic data, the right data, this quality data at the right time. And it's integrating all of this data across the patient journey. And I know Dominic touched on this earlier in terms of data literacy and training, and you know, in UCD, we're very passionate about interdisciplinarity and very passionate about, you know, providing the tools to the basic scientists, the basic clinicians to understand data and understand and become data literate, really. And that's a huge issue. And I think all my fellow panelists have touched upon collaborations, and I suppose I should really talk about that from an academic perspective. You know, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for real, sincere academic industry partnerships, and that's what Imelda, you know, and Enterprise Ireland have done in these DTIFs. You know, real collaborative, trustworthy partnerships. And building relationships. It's at the end of the day, you know, this is all about people. That's one of my mottos anyway, personally. But you know, where academics deliver on clear upfront milestones, they deliver on KPIs, but always, as I go back, you know, with the patient's voice and the patient really at the center of all of this. And so again, just, you know, the real thing, I think, and one thing we've learned in UCD is that access to data is paramount importance. And I love, you know, where is Ireland? And this is my last point. And, you know, where is Ireland on all of this? And I loved Dominic Crotty's idea around this sandbox approach. I think, you know, Ireland with our population, we could have a vision very similar to what they have in the Nordics, you know, where they're mainstreaming data and they're, you know, really the Nordics are the Denmark, you know, spoken to a lot of people across Denmark in terms of these are leaders in providing these coherent clinical pathways built on data. And, you know, it's quality data, but it's really, you know, what we really want to be able to do. And I think academia is really, really 100% behind this, is be able to have access to relevant patient information when it's needed, and as my fellow panelists talked about, do this in a really secure, transparent way.
And what's the university's role in all that, do you see?
Yeah, so the universities facilitate this. I mean, you know, I suppose what, if anything, what COVID has taught us is, you know, we're good at blue sky thinking. I mean, this is, you know, vaccines were able, you know, the RNA technology for vaccines was able to be leveraged very quickly because the universities had this, and they were already collaborating with industry around this. And you know, so I always have, I always like, what is the, you know, the uncovered rough cut diamonds that we have in our universities that are just, you know, with the right, you know, and I think it was Claire that said death by pilots, but I know we do a lot of pilots, but actually, you know, pilots do, and I've seen it, you know, pilots do transfer into, you know, hopefully into the real world. I've seen it happen. And we're doing that so I think, you know, there's a lot of access to a lot of information and a lot of, I suppose, blue sky thinking in the universities that can help drive these ideas forward. Yeah.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much for your time, Patricia. Thank you. The last person we have to talk on the panel is here representing the hospital, who hasn't really had much of a voice today. It's Siobhan, who's Innovations Manager at the Mater Hospital. And Siobhan, I think other than telling us a little bit about yourself, I suppose I'd ask you, why does the hospital want to do this? And how does innovation fit into the whole hospital landscape, which is already full up with all the other challenges of COVID and GDPR and cyber hacking, etc.?
It's a long list, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm an innovation manager in the Mater since 2019, so that's when we set up an innovation function. So I'm sort of taking it from a very, very embryonic state and trying to make something of it. So, and that originated from, in a couple of years before that, the hospital executive had identified that it wanted to set up an innovation function. So actually they had asked us to do a consultation process to sort of figure out, well, what exactly does that mean to the hospital, and why would we do it, and what is the business of an innovation function, and that sort of a thing. And it was a really, really worthwhile process, because it was clear that innovation means different things to different people, which of course it does. But what emerged from that is, in the initial stages at least, our raison d'etre, I suppose, or the reason we were doing this was a need to accelerate the transformation of services, improve services for our patients. That innovation is a way of doing that. That's fundamentally the reason. Another reason then would be to motivate staff. So for staff in the hospital, engaging in innovation is a very exciting thing. It can be very satisfying as a way of solving problems. And attracting and maintaining the best staff is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for hospitals. So that's another major plus for us on it. And I suppose the other reason for doing it as well is at some level, there's sort of a sense of having a mission or a duty to kind of contribute to healthcare. So that is very much there as well in the hospital. So based on that, for the last number of years, a lot of what I've been doing, I suppose, is figuring out how we might engage in that. As I said, we're very green still at this stage, and we're just learning. But I figured the best way of doing it was just to get on with it. So what I actually spend a lot of my time doing is just connecting people in the hospital with people outside the hospital. That's probably the simplest way that I could describe it. And doing that with a view fundamentally to find novel solutions to problems that we're facing, and try and make things better for our patients at the hospital, and possibly wider than that again. And sometimes, so it's about trying to find a novel solution, maybe by we do a lot of work with designers, a little bit with engineers, maybe just looking for funding opportunities, whatever it takes to create new ideas. And then I suppose working with the relevant people to try and drive that forward, whether it's finding them funding or whatever it might be. And it varies a lot what I end up doing, but it's figuring out a way to implement it with them. And it might be small scale, or it might be large scale, it might be finding an industry partner, it could be anything. But I suppose it's important to say as well that that's the role that I hold at the moment as innovation manager. I work in matter transformation, which is a unit in the hospital it's quite unique. It was set up at a broader level to help improve services and drive change in the hospital. And it's been there since 2013, and there's a Lean Academy within the office. So that's about the application of Lean Six Sigma methodology to improve processes. And then more recently, we've established a collaboration with the National College of Art and Design, bringing in their medical device designers, interaction designers, service designers, and working directly with our clinical people to try and solve problems. But fundamentally, like where we come from in matter transformation, it's all about getting the frontline people solving problems. So that's our real passion, and that's what we're really interested in. It's not so much, I suppose, testing something that has emerged externally, but rather helping our staff to solve our problems and to influence healthcare. But more recently then, the hospital has also appointed a director of a clinical director for innovation, which is in a unit now called the Pillar Centre, which holds the function of driving education, research, innovation in the hospital. So that's not our core business, but it's an important part of our mission. And that new role will probably place more focus now on the opportunities, mutually beneficial opportunities of engaging with industry. So that's just to give you sort of a quick sense of what's happening in the hospital and kind of what our current focus is.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think I can start with you with the last question. We've only a minute or two left. The main thing we wanted to do with this today is to try and instill change and to really push on and go from here. So if you were to say what is the one thing or things that you'd like to see happen after today's conference, or what's the next steps in innovation in Ireland?
I would say that it is, speaking on behalf of, or sort of representing, I suppose, the on the ground view in hospitals, it's ways of helping healthcare workers to engage with SMEs and others involved in this space in a kind of de-risked way. It's very difficult for us because it's so labor intensive, it can be very costly, it's hard to do things that don't have a guaranteed output. So it's about sort of de-risking that engagement.
Fantastic. We can, anyone else on the panel maybe? Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, I probably covered a lot of it already. I probably forgot to say that we, you asked me about the university, we've got very clear, transparent frameworks to IP and, who owns IP. So I probably forgot to say that. But I mean, I think really it's access to data in a very coherent way, access in a secure, transparent, coherent way, and data across the data journey. I think that's really key. If we're going to move forward in an ecosystem, that has to be central place.
Imelda?
I think just a comment to say, keep feeding back what's working for you from the funding perspective. We have an early stage fund. We're looking to make it work. We're open to ideas, and keep them coming. It's there for you, so let's use it as well as we can.
Thank you. I think I saw your hand up, Claire.
Well, I would say, following from today, a way for innovative startups and SMEs to actually get sales in Ireland in the health system. We have the likes of EI talking about huge sums of money that are being allocated into the building of innovative solutions here, and it's on us now to make sure that the people of Ireland benefit from those solutions in some way. And the first step towards that, I think, is shifting the conversation from seeing innovation in healthcare as a cost to seeing it as an investment. And I think that mindset change, that it would be a paradigm shift. And I'd love to see that following this conference.
Perfect. And last word with you, Enda.
Yeah, thanks, Niall. So yeah, just to echo what everyone has said, but for me, consistent approach to data management, not piecemeal. A funding pathway similar to what Germany have done with the DVG. So it's not just about research and innovation, it's about implementation. And I just encourage everyone involved in academia and research and innovation, embrace the access you have to industry in Ireland. MedTech Alley is here. And it's not just about regulation and research. You have huge commercial intelligence and skill sets in this country. So let's close the loop from innovation to implementation.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Enda. That brings everything, I think, nicely to a close. I just want to say thanks to all the speakers, everyone listening, everyone at IBM and UCD in running the event. A lot of stuff has been discussed here today, but I think the most important thing to say has been touched on there, is that we don't want it to end here. And today has served to highlight that we can be a centre for innovation, not just at university level, but also getting products all the way through to market. And there are lots of people in the country willing to do that. So thanks very much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.